Salutations, and welcome to the best book review podcast there is, which is critically acclaimed and known worldwide as the best book review podcast there is. This episode will cover a book called Daisy Jones and the Six, first released in 2019 by New York Times bestselling author Taylor Jenkins Reid. This novel follows an up-and-coming singer, Daisy Jones, who can barely get by in her life. She parties frequently and doesn't get anywhere with her career, in a fictional band called The Six. The Six, a rock and roll band whose producer advises them to find a woman to sing a duet with their main vocalist, Billy Dunn, eventually land on Daisy for the job. However, Billy is not happy with this, and they do not get along at all. But ultimately they do for a little bit, and they write many successful songs in this time, which launches the band into unbelievable success and worldwide recognition. After this, they begin to hate each other once more. The band members' relationships with each other become strained due to jealousy, heartbreak, and greed, and it all begins to fall apart. Was the fame worth it? Well, Daisy Jones and the Six soon break up. For good. This book was glaringly decent. It's not revolutionary at all. It's not half bad at all either, though. It's a good read. If you're in the mood, pick it up. You might enjoy it. You might not. So I'd give it a 3.5 star rating out of 5. Maybe a 4 if I were feeling generous, but I think 3.5 is my most honest review of it possible. So I'll start with the things I enjoyed about it. I quite liked the way it was written, even though to begin with, that was the thing that I hated the most. Because you see, Daisy Jones and the Six is not written like your typical novel, with dialogue and descriptions and etc. It's written in an interview fashion. Each paragraph is a new paragraph narrated by a different character, recounting their times working in the band or with the band. And this just keeps going throughout the entire book. This is how the book is written. And like I said, at first, I almost put it down because it was completely unreadable and I felt completely distracted by the fact that it was written in this way and I couldn't absorb the information presented in front of me. But after I got about halfway through the book, I forgot that the format put me off at first to begin with. I was absorbed in the plot and absorbed in the characters and what was happening, and I completely forgot that the format was new. And actually, I'd be willing to read something else in a similar format. I'd be excited to. So, if you think this format is off-putting when you first read it, definitely read it at least halfway through the book before you make any decisions, because it'll either grow on you, and then you'll just finish it, or it won't, and you'll put it down, and that's okay too. So what ended up being one of my favorite parts of it started off as something bad, which I think is interesting. And because it's so interesting, it also ties into the other thing I liked, which was how every character gave their own perspective, which is of course possible through the format that Reid chose for this book, which is obviously chosen for very specific reasons so that this feels like an authentic recounting of a real band's real songs and real tours and real experiences. I think that a lot of the characters in this book are fairly self-absorbed, as with most musicians, really, and not the nicest people. But that doesn't mean that they're not good characters. A good character doesn't have to be a good person to be a good character. I enjoy many villains, many objectively bad characters, such as the people in this book. I enjoy reading through their lens. And they're not the nicest, but they try to portray themselves as better people when they discuss their actions. And since a lot of events are told through different people's perspectives, it's fun to try to piece together what actually happened. Person A says something, person B says something, person C says something, and they're all slightly similar because they're all recounting the same event, but they're all different because they're all different people, so they all have different viewpoints because of how they were raised and where they were, and so on and so forth. So it's fun to try to understand what really happened through the multiple perspectives you get going through the book, which is, I think, pretty fun, but some people might find it annoying. So again, a lot about this book is very subjective. So if you like it, you like it, and if you don't, you don't. But there were, of course, things I didn't like, but I've got to pay the bills, so we've got to get an ad break before we get to that. Let's do that right now. Daisy Jones and the Six. You know them. You love them. You want to understand them. You want to get closer to the greatest band that has ever lived. For 1 month only, Atlantic Records is offering fans around the world the chance to own a piece of the Six. Items such as the keyboard Karen Circo first played a 6 gig on, a guitar pick used by Billy Dunn on their Aurora tour, and more are being offered for a limited time only. Visit www.the6memorabilia.com to get a piece of rock history. Not shipping to the state of Nebraska for reasons undisclosed to the public. $7,000 tax included in the 810 without negotiation. And with that quite fitting and strangely coincidental advertisement out of the way, and the bills paid, I can go into what I didn't like about this novel, and there was quite a bit. So to start off, I didn't like how drugs and addiction overall were portrayed throughout the book. Daisy and Billy both had pretty bad drug issues throughout the book. In the beginning, Billy had one that was so terrible that he was not present at his first child's birth, but after they were born, he got clean so he could be a better father, which is quite commendable, except for the fact that he did it on his first try, which is a little bit unrealistic. That's not a big deal, though, because, it could happen and has happened. But what I don't like is with Daisy's addiction, because she is addicted throughout the entire span of the book until the kind of epilogue where they look back and she reveals how she got clean after the band broke up, but that's not really in the time frame the book takes place in. And so she is constantly popping pills and taking this drug and that drug, different varieties of ways, and the people around her encourage her to do the same, and they do the same thing as well. And she never gets clean, and she's affected by the drugs, of course. She's forgetful, she can't really maintain relationships, she can't really perform well because she's off in her own world, her own drugged world, but she never really suffers any serious detrimental physical effects or something bad, something physically harmful or really dangerous that would potentially happen in reality. So I think it makes drug addiction seem like a little bit less of a serious issue than it is, and makes the road to being clean a little bit easier than it really is, which isn't a huge deal, but I'm kind of grasping at straws for what I disliked here. But moving on, there is something else I didn't like, and that has to do with the writing of the characters. Aside from how addiction was portrayed, I didn't really like the characters, and this is why. Because we get to read how a character sounds, I got to noticing all the characters sound the same. Of course, I know why, because they're all written by the same person in actuality, but Reed could have done a better job at making each character have their own distinctive voice when they speak, or when she writes. Because otherwise, if you removed the headings and I didn't see who said something, I wouldn't be able to tell you who said what, because all of the voices are written like Reed writes, not how each individual would speak. I know, of course, it's a lot to ask, but when you're writing a whole book like this, you should at least know if you can do that before you set out to write in an interview-style format, if you see what I'm saying. But of course, it's still readable, still definitely readable and enjoyable. But I also just like how some characters are portrayed, such as Daisy. She's, the classic mysterious, but broken, but most effortlessly talented and beautiful woman in the world type of thing. Kind of cliche and overdone, annoying to say the least. But overall, I would say this book is interesting if you have any interest in music at all, maybe even if you don't, if you're the kind of person the format speaks to. But if you want a good time and an interesting story, this might be a good pick. Also, in about a month, this book is going to be turned into a show, so that means that people like it enough to adapt it to the big screen. So here's a song from it, and I'm glad your ears have been blessed by the best book review podcast there is, and I certainly hope it happens again.